Hi, I'm Andy with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District in northwest New Mexico. In this backyard conservation workshop video, we will be taking a look at tree planting and care. First of all, I would like to thank David Temple and Roman Jefferson of Trees of Trail Canyon for letting us borrow their slideshow presentation and use part of it throughout this video. Throughout this video, we're going to be looking at why trees are important, picking a location, choosing your tree, acquiring your tree, how to plant your tree, maintaining your trees, and caring for your new tree. So why are trees important? There are so many different reasons that trees are important. We often hear that trees are the lungs of the earth. They take in carbon dioxide and give us oxygen to breathe. They filter our air, taking out pollutants. They can filter the soil, taking toxins and pollutants out of the soil. They provide homes and food for wildlife. They can also provide us shade and cool the surface of our earth. They can increase our property value and add aesthetics to our land. They can give habitat, for a nicer place around our own home or in our backyard, and also habitat for wildlife. We can use it for food production. There's a lot of trees that can produce fruits and nuts and that kind of stuff. Or we can use it for firewood or other wood uses. There's also the mental health and psychological benefits of having trees and wildlife in your area. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of environmental benefits, also such as carbon sequestration, which is where it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere, pushing it into the soil and removing it from the atmosphere, which is where it's a greenhouse gas and contributes to climate change. Also, when you're choosing particular trees for their aesthetic values, think about who will be seeing them from where and when do you want to be able to see it. Do you want to see it seasonally or year-round? Do you want something that's going to add color? Do you want something that's going to add something else? Maybe you're particularly interested in the flowers. So there's a lot of different aspects to the aesthetics of trees. Even more possible reasons why you would want trees would include privacy. Maybe you want a privacy break or a wind break to reduce the amount of wind going through your yard or against your house. So there's a lot of reasons for why you should be planting trees, and you may pick one or many of these different reasons. So now that you know you want a tree, and you have reasons for having a tree, we have to consider a location. And for that, we need to know its purpose, particular environmental factors, safety and regulations, and other things that we'll consider as well. For purpose, again, we kind of come back to that why we want the tree, but this does come into the location for where you're going to plant it. If it's for aesthetics, you want to make sure you can see it or that other people will be able to see it. If it's for food, then you want to make sure it's close to wildlife or close to you. If it's for windbreak, you need to choose where it's going to go to protect you from wind. Privacy, shade, wildlife, all of those other reasons that we discussed will indicate or help you choose where you want to plant your tree. Environmental factors are also an important part because soil, water, and climate all will play into that location and the trees that you pick. So let's take a closer look at some of those soil, water, and climate aspects. Each one has some limitations. For soil, alkalinity versus acidity, basically, what is the pH of the soil? And I won't get into a lot of the chemistry, but basically, over here on the right, we have a chart where we can see that if your pH is right around 7, the plants can use almost all of the minerals and nutrients they need to pull from the soil. However, as the pH goes up or as the pH goes down, it becomes harder and harder for those plants to pull those nutrients from the soil. So here in northwest New Mexico, we typically have soils between a 7.5 and an 8.5 range of pH or alkalinity. And if you're all the way up at 8.5, that tree is going to have a really hard time pulling phosphorus from the soil, or boron from the soil, or the copper and zinc. So maybe when you're choosing which trees you're going to be planting and you're choosing a location, You might want to consider either amending the soil to bring the pH down if you can, which can be very challenging out here because our soils naturally want to stay in a higher pH, and they have a lot of buffers to prevent them from getting their pH lowered. So what a better option is would be to choose plants that naturally grow well in higher pH soils. Pick a plant that will grow well between 8 and 8.5 so you know that it can tolerate that high pH and that challenge of pulling up some of those nutrients. Other soil limitations would be soil compaction. If the soil is too compacted, there's not enough air and water space, meaning the roots aren't going to be able to get the nutrients out of the soil or really grow through the soil. So you might need to soften up the earth around where you're going to be planting that tree. And you also want to make sure you're not planting like right on top of bedrock where the tree roots are not going to be able to go down anywhere. So consider the soil compaction in the area where you want to plant a tree. Soil texture and soil structure, basically whether you have sand, silt, or clay, and whether your soil is very powdery or aggregate, meaning it actually clumps. So having a good soil texture or soil structure depends on the type of tree you're planting. Some trees really like high sandy soils. Some trees really like clay soils, or some like a mixture, a loamy soil. When you're looking at what trees to get, consider your soil texture and structure and use that to help determine what trees will grow best naturally in your local soil. And finally, the fertility or the amount of organic matter and nutrients in the soil. If you have very sterile soil or very minimal nutrients in your soil, that plant's going to have a hard time growing up. So you may need to amend your soil with some manure or natural fertilizers or other potential things that the tree might need that the soil doesn't have a lot of yet. Now, water. Water is also one of the limitations, and trees are the best plumbers. No, these are not actual pipes in the tree. It's just a really cool carving. So, limitations with water. First, so you understand how it works. Water gets absorbed by the roots. The water travels up the trunk, and then it gets pulled up through the process of transpiration. Basically, the water evaporates into the atmosphere from the leaves, and that process pulls water up the tree. So when we're looking at how much water a tree needs, we know that it goes through the process of transpiration. However, if there's not enough water, it can cause cavitation, or basically air pockets inside the xylem of the tree where the water would be flowing up. And once there's air pockets in there, it can prevent the transpiration process, eventually killing the tree. So what we want to look for is turgidity, or basically a plant that has enough water that it's not wilting and it looks, full of water is basically what we're looking for. Well, here in northwest New Mexico, our climate is a little bit drier than other places, and our annual rainfall here in Farmington is about 8.5 inches per year. If you compare that to other places, such as like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that gets an average of 43 inches per year of rain, well, we're probably not going to be able to grow the same trees. So when we're considering, location and things that we need to consider when choosing a tree, we definitely need to consider how much or how little water we get here in northwest New Mexico. So we're going to want to be choosing plants that are drought tolerant. Other limitations include climate. What is the tree's hardiness? Are we going to be able to grow tropical trees here in northwest New Mexico where we get cold winters? Probably not, unless you're growing it in a greenhouse. So when you're trying to determine the hardiness of our area or what plants could grow here, you're going to want to look at the USDA's website for hardiness zones. And the map that you're going to see is based on an average of annual minimum winter temperatures divided into 10-degree Fahrenheit zones. So for example, here in Farmington, we are between a 6A and a 7A, depending on where you are. Albuquerque is between a 7A and a 7B, and Silverton up in Colorado is a 4B, meaning it gets much colder in the winter. And this is what one of those maps would look like. This is from the USDA's Plant Hardiness website. And for our area of northwest New Mexico, we're around a 6B, meaning that on average, our annual winter lows will get between -5 Fahrenheit and 0 degrees Fahrenheit. However, there can be extremes, so you have to watch out for those trees that are right on that border of hardiness, because if we get a really cold freeze down to -10, some trees might not make it. Other climate considerations include diurnal temperature swings, meaning how big of a temperature difference do you get between nighttime and daytime. Here in the desert with low humidity, we get very high temperatures in the day and very low temperatures at night, so we have a very high diurnal temperature swing. However, where it's more humid, and especially along coastlines, it's going to be a much lower temperature swing. For example, in Los Angeles, you might have a temperature of 100 degrees during the day and only 80 at night, whereas here we could have 100 degrees during the day and 50 at night. So we can have really big swings up to like 50-degree differences. Also, how windy is the climate? Here in northwest New Mexico, we get a lot of wind, especially in the spring and in the fall. And with how dry it is, that wind will wick moisture away from your plants. Also, we get really, really dry winters, meaning the air is really dry. We often see our air humidity between 5 and 10% throughout the winters, sometimes even lower as 3%. You also have to consider local factors and microclimates. For example, here at my house where I live, we often get rainstorms all around us, but we don't get any rain here. Just this summer when Farmington got an inch of rain in a big thunderstorm that passed through our whole region, it just went right around our house and we got nothing. So consider your microclimates or your little local geology or geography that might be playing into your little local weather. Maybe you're in a little cold pocket in a valley where when you know that when it gets cold at night, your house gets a little bit colder than surrounding areas, and you might need to consider a little bit hardier plants for cold hardiness. And then also consider site-specific factors. This could include anything from sun, how much sun and shade your yard gets, whether you're north facing or south facing, depending on the intensity of the sun during the summer. Also, whether it's like a riparian area where there's a lot of groundwater, or maybe a rocky slope or mesa top where there's very little groundwater. Also, is that tree going to be out in the open where it might be hit by a lot more sun and wind, or is it going to be protected and nestled amongst other trees? So there's a lot of site-specific factors that you need to consider as well. Also, you should always consider safety and regulations. You do not want to plant trees directly under power lines or directly over water lines. If you know where your water main is in your yard, you shouldn't be planting trees at least within 10 feet or even further away. Some trees can have really hard penetrating roots that can go up to 30 feet away or more, and you don't want those messing with your water lines and causing a rupture or a leak underground. And obviously with power lines, there's a big fire and electrical safety hazard. If you have big trees growing under power lines, then you have to deal with trimming them. So consider what is around before you choose your tree and your location. Also consider encroachment. Maybe you really like having a big willow tree right on the side of your yard, but once that big willow tree grows up and starts dropping a lot of limbs and leaves and seed pods, maybe your neighbor isn't going to be so happy if all of that is landing on their patio or on their yard. So consider encroachment or areas where you might need to be considerate of your neighbors or other landowners. Also, be aware of city and local ordinances. In some places, they may not allow certain plants to be planted in certain areas, particularly in that strip between the road and a sidewalk. You typically cannot plant trees there without permission, and there's typically very specific trees that they will allow, such as they typically won't want, say, a peach tree or a plum tree that's going to be dropping a lot of fruit onto that sidewalk and on the road. So be aware of your city and local ordinances. Finally, some other things that you might want to consider when you're choosing your tree is consider how well your trees fit into your overall landscape. How is that going to impact the views and the image or the idea of the natural landscape around your home? Also, consider what your neighbors have planted and promote plant diversity. If everybody has the same tree and a disease comes through, well, now all of your trees are going to die. But if you have a lot of diversity amongst your trees and plants, then you can hopefully have the majority of them survive if a disease comes through. Usually the diseases are pretty specific to individual trees or types of trees. And anything else? There's always more things to consider when choosing a location or a type of tree, and a lot of it depends on your location, what you want to get out of it, and what you want to have, years down the road. So now we're to choosing your specific tree. Do you want to choose a native or non-native or invasive? We really hope you will not be planting invasive trees. We spend a lot of time and money trying to get rid of those invasive trees that are damaging our environment and outcompeting our native trees for resources and habitat. So we try to discourage, and would really strongly discourage, planting invasive trees. Now, as for native or non-native, there's a lot of ornamental trees that are drought tolerant and do really well in our area. Benefits of native versus non-native for trees. Your native trees are going to be producing a habitat and food source that the local wildlife is already adapted to. Non-native or ornamental trees may be producing something that maybe it gives you a benefit, in which case, if it's not invasive, then that might be good for you. But the wildlife might not be as good for the wildlife if you're trying to have trees that are benefiting your local wildlife. Also, male or female plants. That can make a difference. For example, if you're planting a New Mexico privet or a New Mexico olive or foresteria, well, the male plant does not produce fruit, but the female does. However, you typically need a male and a female tree near each other to pollinate, and that way you can have fruit produced for the wildlife nearby. How many trees are you going to plant? Well, if you're planting a windbreak, you're probably going to want quite a few trees in a row or in an area. And how much space are those trees going to need once they grow up? So if you're looking for ideas on what plants are recommended in our area, you can always look at the NRCS, or Natural Resource Conservation Service, recommended plant list for our area, or the Albuquerque approved tree list, or our local county extension recommendations. All three of those links will be posted in the description below this video. So which tree should you buy? Make sure you're buying and planting the right tree for the right place. Think about the tree's final size and how it's going to impact something around it. In that bottom left picture, what you're looking at, in case you think those trees are looking a little weird, it's because they grew too tall, were running into the power lines, and so they just cut them off at the top. Instead of originally thinking, oh look, there's power lines here, let's plant a tree that will stay small and not grow up into the power lines. So consider your place when you're planting trees. Here are some conifers that you can consider for our northwest New Mexico area, including pinyon pine, ponderosa pine, Utah juniper, Rocky Mountain juniper, Swiss stone pine, Arizona cypress, limber pine, arborvitae, and alligator juniper. And there are others. Those are just some good suggestions. And if you're planting for wildlife, just some things to consider for our area include crabapple, hawthorn, chokecherry, oaks, and native conifers. There are, of course, many other options. However, trees to avoid planting, especially here in northwest New Mexico, where we are constantly in drought and we have very little water for our native trees. We want to avoid trees that are going to be having roots that go deeper than our native trees and pull up more water than our native trees that eventually outcompete our native trees and kill off our native trees. Those are going to include the Siberian elm, Russian olive, globe willow. Now note that the globe willow is different than the desert willow. The desert willow is a small tree. It is native to our area and it is drought tolerant and it is not invasive. And it only gets about 20 feet tall. It stays quite small and it grows pretty slowly. So that's the desert willow is the good one. The globe willow is the one we do not want here. Also avoid aspen, purple robe locust, Bradford pear, red maple, and salt cedar or tamarisk. So acquiring your tree. We're going to take a look at the size, how to visually inspect your tree, the sources where you can get your trees, and growing and shipping methods that you should consider when buying your tree. So for size, we basically want to consider, what benefits do we want from the tree and what experience do we want from the lifespan of that tree. Maybe you want to go through the experience of growing a tree from a seed, having it started, grow up through the seedling phase, through, a small tree, medium tree, up to a large tree, a full-grown tree. Maybe you want to see that whole process, or maybe you're planting, seeds for your kids to watch them grow up as they grow older. Maybe you want some shade already and you don't want to wait for a tree to grow up, so you want to bring in a larger tree. Size is really up to you, and you can, of course, get, either seeds or seedlings or trees of pretty much any size that you want. Just know that the larger the tree, typically the more expensive and the more, work goes into getting that tree transported and planted. For where you get your trees, one of the best sources is, if you're here in northwest New Mexico or anywhere in New Mexico, is the New Mexico State Forestry. They offer a seedling program every year in the spring and in the fall. You can go to that website, which I've also linked in the description below this video. And they offer seedlings at very, very reasonable prices. Typically, for smaller seedlings, like you kind of see with that cottonwood there, it'd be about $2 per seedling. You usually get about 49 seedlings for $80, and that includes shipping and handling, roughly, typically. They offer a lot of different varieties of plants that are really good for our area. Everything from shrubs to, fruit producers for wildlife, to windbreak, to shade trees. Anything that you would want, the New Mexico State Forestry typically has, if they haven't sold out yet for that season. There are some requirements. Be sure that you meet all the requirements of their guidelines for the seedling order before you place an order. Also, you can go through online retailers and your local nurseries. But other things that people often don't consider is your local plant and seed savers associations or groups. Maybe you have a club in the area or in your town where you can trade seeds, plants, that kind of stuff. Or maybe there's a group on Facebook in your area that often shares when somebody has extra seedlings or extra seeds to offer. Here in northwest New Mexico, in the Farmington area, our San Juan Seed Savers Association. We have a Facebook page, San Juan Seed Savers, and they often post stuff when people have extra seedlings or plants. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, we had a seed and seedling plant exchange outdoors, so we could all distance safely, and people were able to acquire some plants and trees to plant this fall. Also, you can transplant plants. If you know somebody who in their yard has some, some saplings growing up or some seeds that have sprouted that they don't want those trees, but maybe they would like somebody else to grow them, see if they'd be willing to let you transplant it. Often if you get them, as a small tree, it doesn't take much to, grab a shovel, dig it up, and move it to your place. If you decide to have your tree shipped or you get it at a nursery, there's a few things or a few different ways that you can purchase them. You can have them in a ball and burlap, in a container grown, or a bare root tree. There are benefits and drawbacks to each. For ball and burlap, they can be missing some of the roots. Some of the roots can get ripped out and get stuck in the burlap. They can be slow to establish, and they can be really heavy because of all of that extra dirt. Some of the advantages is it's typically smaller. Often your trees can be, the size of the tree can be anywhere from, large to small, but the size of the root mass is going to be smaller, which is partly why it takes a little longer to be established. It also prevents circling roots, which we're going to talk about in a second. And it's easy to prune the roots if you need to, because you have access to the roots when you plant it. For container grown, there are limitations. For example, the stem girdling or roots, or wrapping roots, that's where the roots start wrapping around the circumference of the tree. And it can also lead to instability because the roots have not spread out enough to be able to stabilize the tree. There are some advantages to containers in that they have all of their roots and they can establish quickly, and it's cheap and easy. But you really want to watch out for those girdling or wrapping roots. Here's some examples where the roots were not cut off or untangled or pruned, and they were left in the container for too long. And those roots wrap around the tree and end up suffocating it and can actually kill your tree. And if you don't realize that's happening because you don't see that part of the root and it's underground, that can lead to a dangerous situation where the tree basically kills and suffocates itself and then becomes a falling hazard. You can also get bare root. There are some limitations or challenges with this, such as timing. You only would want to do this certain times of the year. The trees are then left vulnerable and potentially more susceptible to disease from having bare roots. Also, especially here in northwest New Mexico where it's so dry, the roots can dry out really quick. So you gotta keep those roots wet if they're bare and exposed. And then also the size. Sometimes the size of the tree for bare roots are going to be really large. Typically, when you buy smaller trees, you'll get them in a burlap or a container. But if you're buying a large tree or bare root trees, you're typically getting large trees. Advantages, it is cheaper, it is easier, and you can get them in a large quantity because they are less expensive. If you're going to go to a nursery or have one delivered for you, you can often actually pick one out and say, oh, this one looks nice and healthy, so you can visually inspect the tree. And you can have it delivered and have that one shipped directly to you or transported to you and even planted for you. Some things that you do want to check for visual inspection for a healthy tree: make sure it has one leader trunk with a balanced number of branches on each side, that it appears healthy and free from insect damage, and there is evidence of new growth, and that the roots are still damp and do not have a foul odor. A foul odor in the roots often indicates poor drainage and that the roots were actually rotting, and that can often lead to a deceased tree pretty soon. So finally, planting your tree. All of this has led up to, how to plant and take care of your tree, but the planting part is actually pretty simple. A few things to take into mind or to consider is when to plant your tree. Planting at different times of the year has benefits or drawbacks, and some plants do better at different times of the year. Here in northwest New Mexico, typically most nurseries will recommend planting trees anytime that is basically not during the hot summer, so spring or fall. In the spring, once the soil has thawed out, or in the fall, before the soil has frozen. And if you're planting in the fall and you know that there's a freeze coming, make sure you water that newly planted tree well so that the roots have insulation and water in there to protect the roots from freezing. But often you can plant trees year-round here in New Mexico as long as you're watering them. But the best time of day is going to be in the afternoon or evening, so they can have an evening and morning to get established before the hot sun. Or if it's in the fall and winter, you can plant them in the morning so they have a little bit of warmth and sunlight to help them get established before a cold night. And when you're planting a tree, you want to make sure to dig the hole extra wide, 2 to 3 times the size of the ball root. So if you notice in that picture, the ball or the burlap sack was roughly this size across. So you want that much room dug out on this side and another that much room dug out on this side. What you do want to avoid is digging too deep. Look for the root flare. So here you can see the root comes down from the tree and it flares out right there. You just barely want that covered or right at the surface of the soil. You don't want to bury the trunk of the tree. That leads to disease. It can get insects getting into the trunk of the tree and killing the tree. Do make sure to remove the burlap and wire cage from the top of the mesh bag, or the wire cage from the whole bag. And then if it's a burlap, make sure that you at least remove the burlap from the top. Any burlap that gets left on the bottom half will decompose and the roots will be able to grow through and around it. But make sure you remove the top so that water can get to the roots. Also, once you have planted your tree and you're backfilling it, make sure you're using a nutritious soil that is appropriate for the tree. Some trees are going to require more nutrients or a particular type of soil, as we talked about earlier, so make sure that you're giving that newly planted tree the best start it can have. And finally, mulch and water. If you have not yet watched our video on mulching, I highly recommend that, and I'll have the link in the description below. And the mulching is going to help protect the soil, protect the roots, and keep moisture down in the soil. It's also going to add nutrients as it slowly breaks down. And finally, water. Make sure you heavily water that tree when you first plant it and really saturate those roots. For a lot of, if you're looking for more detailed guidelines or specific plant guidelines, obviously I can't go into every single tree and different considerations for planting every single tree. If you want specific guidelines for specific trees, the New Mexico State Forestry has that information, and I will post that link in the description below as well. But you can get information on planting specific trees if there's anything to take into consideration, time of year, time of day, that kind of stuff, type of soil. And also they have some other guidelines, but most of it's pretty simple. You dig a hole, make sure it's plenty wide, not too deep. Make sure that your roots are going to be able to be exposed if it's in a burlap or wire cage, and use nutritious soil, mulch, and water. Mulching, as I mentioned, helps with water retention, nutrient cycling. It helps beneficial fungus and bacteria grow in the soil. It really increases that microbiome, and it also suppresses weeds around your trees so that your trees can have the best growth possible. In this picture here, there's not quite enough mulch. Typically, you want 3 to 6 inches of mulch, but you don't want the mulch touching the bark of the tree. You kind of want to make a moat around the tree with mulch. Think of it like a volcano versus a caldera. A volcano of mulch is not good because now you have the tree, the root or the trunk of the tree covered in mulch. That allows bugs to live in the mulch and get into the trunk of the tree. If you have a caldera like Crater Lake, then you have a bowl basically, and your mulch mounds up on the outside, but down in the middle, it's not actually touching the roots. And there should be a picture in a little bit showing that in more clarity. Or watch our mulching video. For soil amendments, if your soil needs more nutrients, you can add manures. Make sure that if you're adding it to the soil when you're planting the tree, to add cold manures, such as sheep, goat, or rabbit manure. Those have lower nitrogen contents and can be added directly to the soil when you're planting plants. So make sure you top dress, add plenty of soil up on top, but not covering much higher than where the root starts to flare out. And as the soil gets compacted and water over time, make sure you replace that topsoil so you don't have a divot or a hole around your tree. And make sure you keep mulching. Always keep that 3 to 6 inches of mulch up around your tree. So here you can see how the mulch has a kind of a mound or a moat over or around the tree, but the tree trunk itself is kind of in a little bowl or a hole. And you keep that mulch year round. Also, you're going to want to make sure you protect that tree from any rodents or deer or anything that might want to be trying to eat your trees. Especially when they're saplings, they are delicious snacks for deer, rabbits, or lots of wildlife out there. So make sure that you have a wire cage around it when you plant it, and support it with a T-post or heavy stick, something like that, to protect that tree. Also, make sure you're watering your trees. They just got planted. Their roots were dried. Their roots were damaged by being moved around. They really need a lot of tender, loving care. Even drought-tolerant trees here in Northwest New Mexico need to be watered for the first few years. They need to get those roots established, the roots down into the ground where they can start pulling up water that is down in the ground, the natural groundwater. And they also need to spread their roots out so that when we do get rain, they can actually grab some of that moisture. So plan on watering your trees at least for the first 2 to 3 years. When you're checking for how much to water, automate it. If you know how much water it needs, put it on a timer. You can also figure that newly planted trees need about 1 inch of water per week, so that you can put a little tuna can out there water and see how much how far it fills up, and then put it on a timer so you know that it's only watering as much as that tree needs. Also, you can do the finger test, dig down into the soil. If the soil is damp enough where you can feel dampness and coolness in the soil, then the tree should be able to get some water out of it. Also look for turgidity, or basically the opposite of wilting. If you see wilting in your tree, probably needs more water. If it looks nice and full and healthy, then you're probably doing it right. And don't forget winter watering. It is super dry here in New Mexico. Also, the watering helps insulate the roots and protect them from freezing. So you're going to be watering those new trees for 2 to 3 years all year round. Also, with maintaining your trees, as I mentioned before, mulching. Maintain about 3 to 6 inches, and that'll help prevent weeds from coming up as well. And also prune off suckers. In this upper picture, you can see lots of new plants starting from the root area, and those are just going to take away from the main growth of the tree. So prune off the suckers. And Trees of Trail Canyon actually recommends, there's a couple different ways of watering, but they recommend having a drip irrigation system go right to the base of the tree to encourage less roots growing out and more roots growing down. There's a couple different methods of watering. Some people will say make sure that you're watering to the extent of the drip line of the furthest leaves out. Some people will say, water right where the roots are. It's kind of depends on your choice and on the tree and what it can tolerate. But watering just at the base will encourage the roots to grow down more and stay more localized if you're trying to avoid a lot of root spread in an area. Now, pruning your tree. There's basically the 3 Ds is the main reason you'd want to prune a tree, where you're pruning the diseased, the dead, and the damaged stuff. When you're pruning your trees, please be safe, or better yet, hire a professional. This person is not a professional. That does not look good. Please be safe. If you do decide to prune your own trees, which you can definitely do when they're younger, why would you prune your trees? Typically to make sure that they are structurally sound as they develop. Think of it how, we go to the doctor's office and have blood work done to see, how is our body doing? Do we need more of this vitamin, more of this type of food, more of this nutrient? How is our growth and development going? How is our bone structure growing? Well, same type of thing with pruning for trees. We want to make sure that they have the best possible growth that will support a healthy, established tree years in the future. So, your first year, you're going to be looking for cutting off main root, or where there's more than one main stem. So here we have the main growth stem, or the central leader, and we're going to be pruning off where there's it's more heavily weighted on one side than the other, or there's too many branches right at the top growth point. So here we had 3 branches all clustered together. Well, we went from the left side to the right side and then back to the left side. So we cut that middle one off to support a balanced growth on each side. Then up here, we basically now have 3 upward growing top stems. And we want to make sure that the tree grows upward from one main leader stem. So we're going to prune those 2 side stems off. Then in the second year, we want to start making sure that the branches are not going to be running into each other or promoting low growing growth. So here we've got one good stem. We've got those 2, the alternating stems that we had started with year 1, and a couple new stems. Here you can see 2 stems kind of started at the same point. You generally don't want 2 stems growing off of the same or at the same node. So cutting that one on the left, so we have a left, right, left alternating, and then cutting branches that are starting to run into other branches, or ones that might end up hanging too low as the tree grows older and matures. Finally, in the third year of growing, we're starting to see branches growing into other branches. If a branch is on the top of a limb and it's starting to produce growth inwards towards the center, especially like this one here, we want to cut that off. We want branches to go out and up, not inwards. So this one here, this branch was running into this other branch, so we would trim that one. This one here is downward growth and would potentially be leading to a low-hanging limb that we don't want to deal with in the future, so we'll prune that off now. This one here is an inward branching limb. We want to keep the growth growing outwards from the main leader. And here we've got just some limbs that are all growing too close together, so we'll cut that one to give this main limb some more growth room. And again, this limb here is growing in towards the center, so we're going to trim that one off right there. And then that's basically how you're pruning your tree as it grows up. You keep going for those three main things. Keep one central leader stem or trunk. Minimize low branches that will be impacting you later on, and minimize branches running into other branches, and also minimize branches growing into the middle of a tree. Keep them growing out and up. Here's some examples of trees that could have used some pruning earlier on. This one here on the left basically had 2 or 3 or 4 branches all coming out of one node, and that should have been pruned earlier on to prevent basically 4 big trunks, or at least 3 big trunks and a medium-sized trunk, all coming off of the same node. That can lead to bifurcation, where the tree actually splits down that joint. Here's where you can see it starting to develop, and you still have time to prune it before it gets too bad. We have the main leader stem going up here, and we've got this other one that is kind of acting like a main leader stem. It's growing upwards as opposed to outwards and upwards, and it's now creating basically 2 main leader stems. Also, they're coming out of the same node as this other one, but this one's growing outwards more as opposed to upward. So we're going to cut that branch off right there and keep this as the main leader stem. There is a little bit more pruning that you may notice needs to be done in here, preventing branches going backward inwards to the tree. But that's the main concern right there, is making sure you don't have 2 leader trunks or 2 leader growth stems. So what happens if you don't take care of your bifurcating joints? It produces basically a split in your tree where the 2 limbs were trying to grow as the main leader stem, and eventually it will lead to that whole tree splitting and one of the sides falling over, exposing the other side to disease and rot, where you lose typically the whole tree. So how to make a pruning cut? If it's small enough that you can use pruning shears, typically about 3/4 inch and less, you can use pruning shears. But if you're having to use a saw, you want to do it in a particular way to prevent from damaging the tree. This is the order in which you make the cuts. You make a cut from the underside of the branch away from the main trunk. What this does is, if you were to cut this branch off here, as you're cutting downwards, the weight of the branch could cause this whole thing to rip off and rip bark all the way down the side of the tree, exposing the inner part of the tree to disease and pests. So by cutting the notch at this point, as you're cutting the branch down this way, the weight of the tree, if it does decide to rip, will only rip to right here, and it won't damage the rest of the tree. So first cut A, then cut B and cut your limb off. And then once you've got the majority of the weight off, then you can cut C, and you don't have to worry about ripping the branch off. We don't have to be talking about, a foot or 2 feet where it's going to have a lot of weight or a large limb. These can all be within a couple inches of each other, so you don't have a big, heavy limb that you're cutting off at the end. So that's how you can make a pruning cut and protect your tree from damage while cutting. A couple other things. When you're pruning, make sure that you have a slightly upward facing slant to your prune. You don't want it completely vertical or downward facing. That can prevent it from drying properly and can lead to infection. Also, make sure you don't have cuts that are completely horizontal. That can lead to water pooling, which leads to rot and disease. Some common myths with pruning your tree is that topping your tree or cutting the top off is good. It is actually one of the worst things that you can do for your tree. It exposes the core of the tree to infection and disease and pests. It causes non-uniform growth, basically this epicormic branch growth, Look at this picture over here. These are now 4 new trees trying to grow off of this, cut tree. That is not going to be a nice, uniform, a single leader stem. You now have, 3 different leader stems, and the rest of the tree just looks awful and has so many wounds open to disease and pests. It's a huge setback for the tree and can eventually kill it if you do this too extensively or too often. It's also big carbon loss because now all of that big tree is no longer there with leaves able to pull in carbon dioxide and pump carbon down into the ground. Also, here's where I was talking about mulch as a volcano. This mulch is coming up too high on the trunk, potentially leaving an area for insects to live in the mulch and get into the bark. This mulch should come up and then back down and leave the trunk exposed. Another myth is that painting the trunk white helps prevent sun scalding. There's not a lot of scientific evidence. Typically, painting the trunk is with a insecticide paint to prevent pests from burrowing into your trunks down low. There's another often misconception that your tree just needs to be thinned. If your tree is, meeting the requirements of this pruning diagram back here, and you don't have stuff growing into each other and you don't have inward growing branches, then your tree is probably doing great. So finally, again, I would like to thank David Temple and Roman Jefferson with Trees of Trail Canyon for letting us use a lot of their slideshows. And then also, just remember, we all need trees. This was a poster from one of our poster contests at San Juan Son Water Conservation District a few years back. Thank you for joining our Backyard Conservation Workshop video on tree planting and care. If you have any questions, you can visit our website at sanjuanswcd.com, and you can contact us through there, and we'd be happy to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you want to learn more. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you will check out our other videos.